Hey there, dividend growth stock investors. You've got DGI Crab here coming to you with another video discussing some concepts around retirement. So, did a comparison video the other day talking about the strategies that I utilize on this channel, where I'm taking 60 of the highest quality dividend growth stocks as well as some quality dividend paying ETFs and utilizing those to build passive income with a plan and building up a portfolio that I'll be able to retire off of using just simply the dividends. Well, what if you have somebody who's not really actively managing their portfolio and they're just sort of passively investing into the S&P 500? Well, theoretically, I don't really have any problems with that particular strategy if you're not somebody that wants to pay really close attention to individual stocks and just actively manage what's going on in your portfolio from week to week or month to month. But in terms of being able to retire comfortably, it's not going to leave us with as many options. So let me get into this and we'll kind of go over a couple of things here. But before I go any further, I will say I'm not a licensed professional. Do your own due diligence. Don't just listen to this one crab's opinion. This is a strategy that I use. Maybe it makes sense for you, maybe it doesn't, but don't invest in anything because I told you to. Always do your own due diligence first. All right, so here we're going to look at a portfolio that is just nice and simple. It's just S&P 500, SPY. Let's imagine that this is an investor who's, maybe around age 53, 55. They're at the point where they want to just retire. They've worked really hard to build up this brokerage account. They've got a nice $650,000 portfolio that's made up entirely of SPY. They've got 1,200 shares of SPY, and that portfolio is yielding 1.26% and generating $8,200 a year in dividend income. Well, not bad, but listen, even if you're somebody who did a lot of things right over the course of those years, you paid off your house, you don't have any silly consumer debt like cars or credit cards or anything like that lying around, and you are your monthly living expenses as a result are fairly low, well, I still don't think $8,200 a year is going to get you very far. You're going to obviously need more than that. So what does a person who has primarily just invested in growth, which is the S&P 500, do in this scenario? Well, one very common refrain among financial experts and whatnot are that you utilize the 8% rule, which is just simply year to year you don't want to pull more than 8% of the overall value of your portfolio out in order to live on. So this cell here represents 8% of 650,000, which is $52,000 a year. So this person could theoretically pull out $52,000 a year, and the overall balance of their brokerage should most of the time stay about level. Maybe some years it goes up a little bit, maybe some years it goes down a little bit. And the reason that works out is that the S&P 500 on average increases about 11% a year. And remember, that's an average. Some years it's going to increase 18%. Other years it might go down 5%. It's just, year to year it could do different things, but the average over the life of the stock market and the whole concept of the S&P 500 is 11%. And it's pretty steady in that regard, but it's just not a flat percentage. Just keep that in mind. So, $52,000 a year plus some dividend income, that's pretty good. I mean, that's not too bad. I think most people could do pretty well living off of that. But the reason why this bothers me a little bit for this particular investor, this particular portfolio, is what happens in situations where we have stock market crashes. If you think back to our last major one, which is the COVID crash of late February, early March of 2020. If this was the portfolio that we were looking at the time, and it was just SPY, it was worth $650,000. All of a sudden, within the span of about 2 weeks, that $650,000 portfolio is worth about $375,000, $400,000. And if you're, just going into retirement with that, and you're in the middle of this of this crisis where, hindsight being 2020, no pun intended, hindsight being 2020, as it turned out, that crash only lasted for a few months, and by the middle of the summer, the market had pretty well recovered. But in March of 2020, I mean, we didn't have any idea. If you think back to what it was like to be an investor at that point in time, we had no idea if that crash was going to last a few months or a few years. We still hadn't figured out how serious COVID was going to be. It was a really scary, uncertain time, and there were a bunch of people that just dove out of the stock market at exactly the wrong time, and they were probably just kicking themselves 3 or 4 months later when the things that they sold that were way down in share price when they were in a panic just went right back up again to where they were. So timing the market is an aspect of selling off these shares, because if you think about where we're at now in 2024, we have the stock market that is, we're achieving these all-time highs. Feels like at any point in time this year, it would have been a nice time to sell off a decent chunk of this portfolio and, put it in something safe like cash and just live off of that for as long as possible. But if you did that in March or in April, thinking that was going to be the peak of the market, well, you'd have missed out on several months of really quality gains. So, with something like this, I just feel like there are too few options available to you in your retirement age, because some years taking 8% out of the portfolio may not seem like the greatest idea in the world. And if we do have a crash that lasts for more than just a few months, then this share price really could start to depreciate after a while. You're pulling out whole shares, and then if the market's down for a couple of years, if we have something a little bit more akin to like the 2008 financial crisis, where the markets were down for about 18 months, then you might see your portfolio really depreciate in value, and you'll start to be a little bit concerned about how long that's going to last. So let's compare this with something like the DGI Crab style portfolio, where we've got sort of a smattering of holdings here. So similar portfolio value, we're pretty much at $650,000. Now what I've done here is I've just kind of constructed this example portfolio where we've got sort of the primary ETFs that you'd be investing in using a strategy like mine. Between the ages of 18 all the way up through 53, you'd have a dividend appreciation ETF like VIG. You'd have some dividend-focused ETFs like SCHD, VYM. You'd still have S&P 500. Now, I do VOO. I could have just as easily put SPY. Basically same difference, but I just do this one. And then you'd have some international ETF here. Anyone that follows the channel knows I like VYMI. And then I just put in some of my favorite individual stocks, like my top 10 favorite stocks like McDonald's and UNP, Realty Income, Pepsi, Procter Gamble, etc. And then just a few other ones that were kind of right outside my top 10 favorites: Lockheed Martin, Realty Income, Air Products and Chemicals, Automatic Data Processing. So just, good solid portfolio. We've got fewer than 20 stocks. We've got 6 ETFs, also including our small cap value ETF. And the total dividend income that we've got here on this one is $16,000. Now, $16,000 is still not a ton to live off of. Again, even if you've done a lot of other things right and you're pretty well financially set with other things like your house and not having a bunch of car debt and credit card debt and things like that hanging over your head. But this would still be a pretty tight amount of money to live on if this was all you had coming in. But with this portfolio now, we have a lot of options of some things that we can do here. So like, for example, we might take something like Microsoft. As of today, if we were managing this portfolio in retirement, Microsoft would be our lowest yielding stock in the portfolio. And based on my metrics, which is analyzing the current yield versus the 4-year average yield, Microsoft is one of the more overvalued individual stocks that we have here. So we might take something like this and say, well, I've had this position for a long time. It's just, it's just grown and grown and grown and grown. It's worth way more than the amount of money that I actually invested into it myself. I've got more than $25,000 in this position. What might I do here? Well, I might sell the position, take the $25,000 and live off of that while reinvesting all of these other dividends over that point in time while I'm living off that 25,000 into the other stocks that are yielding higher. Or I could sell it off, move the $25,000 just immediately into some of the other higher yielding positions, like maybe realty income or one of the higher yielding ETFs like SCHD or VYM. That's certainly a possibility, because that $25,000 that's only generating $180 worth of annual income could very easily be 5x or even 10x depending on what I moved it into, which would certainly move the needle down here on this bottom line. And we could do something similar like with another low yielder like Visa. Maybe we've gotten all the growth out of that we need to get at this point in time. We could move that 18.4 somewhere else. So we've got some possibilities there. And another thing that we could also look at, you'll notice this portfolio does not include any of the particularly higher yielding instruments that I start having people take a look at when they get to age 54 and older. So you might look at things like high yield bonds like SCHY. You might look at preferred shares like PFFA. Both of these are a lot higher yielding. They pay monthly, and you could take something like Visa or Microsoft that yield less than 1%, stick them in something that yields 7 to 9 or even 10%. And now all of a sudden we're jumping this total well up over $20,000, and we haven't actually even moved anything out of the portfolio. We still have that $650,000. We've just given ourselves an instant dividend increase. Another advantage that we have here is collectively these stocks and ETFs should, even if we're not reinvesting dividends, give us those annual steady dividend increases that this channel focuses on, to where this number here, even without reinvesting dividends, ought to be going up by about 7 to 8% every single year, just through the dividend increases that these companies have provided year in and year out, in a lot of cases for decades. Whereas with our S&P 500, this generally tends to only go up by maybe about 5-ish% a year. And it's not particularly consistent, because the S&P 500 is just not a dividend focused fund. It's a market cap size focused fund. So I have a lot of options here. I have ways where I can immediately increase my annual income by moving things around. I can pull out some of my larger positions and let the dividend reinvestment, or I could pull out some of my low yielding positions, use that cash, and then just let my dividend reinvestment continue to accumulate. And I can start taking some of these lower growth position or lower yielding positions and move them into high yielding positions that are more appropriate when I'm in my mid to late 50s and I'm ready to retire and really start living off of that income. Now you might say, well, DGI Crab, I could take all of my SPY and just start transferring that over into high yielding instruments. Absolutely, you could. But let's think about the profile of this investor. This is somebody that hasn't been doing that research, hasn't been paying attention to individual stocks, doesn't know a preferred share from their elbow, doesn't know anything about the tax implications of high yield bonds or MLPs, just all these different things that, a nerd like me and perhaps like you are going to be well aware of over the years as we are actively investing in these positions. We know what they are. We know why we invested them. We know why we're holding them. Think about this person who's 55 and all they did was just passively put money into the S&P 500 and chill. All of a sudden in retirement, when they're wanting to make sure they have enough to live on, they're going to learn all that stuff at the last minute. That seems pretty stressful too. So to me, I like building up a portfolio like this, because the final thing I'll say is, outside of realty income, so long as you have things in here that aren't bonds, real estates, BDCs, or MLPs, this is going to be tax-free for the first $47,000 this year. That's not too bad. So that's the kind of portfolio I want to build. Email me your questions and tell me what you think at dgicrab@yahoo.com, and I'll see you next time.